Welcome to Paranormal or Reality. On today's video, we explore some unexplained stories. First, we take a look at a ghost bridge. Then we investigate a haunted hospital. Now make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. Let's begin. When I was in high school, my friends and I used to go to Black Snake Road to race each other. It was in a very rural area and had little traffic and was very dark. We called it that because of several hairpin turns. However, there was a perfect half-mile that was marked by a bridge in one end and train track on the other. One night, after several of us had been racing, I found that I was the last to leave. As I approached the bridge, I saw a girl standing there dripping wet. I stopped and asked if she was okay, and she responded that her boyfriend missed the bridge and crashed into the water. She said that he was still in the truck. I got out of my car and ran around the side of the bridge and down the embankment. There was no deep river, but just a shallow creek. I saw no evidence of a truck or anything out of the ordinary. Returning to the top of the bridge, I found her standing next to my car, dripping wet and crying. There was no cell phone back then, so I offered to drive her home so that we could call the police from there. She accepted and directed me to her home. On the ride, she told me that her name was Sally. Her home was directly across the street from a small church, a couple streets away from the bridge. As we pulled into the driveway, she asked me to go to the door and get her mother. I knocked at the door of the dark house, feeling a little uneasy. After all, it was after midnight by that point, and I knew that I was waking everyone in the house. After a few moments, an older lady answered the door, who I assumed was her grandmother. I told her what had happened, and that Sally was upset and wanted her mother to come to the car. That is when the story got even stranger. The lady told me that her daughter Sally had been dead for over 30 years. She had drowned when her boyfriend missed the bridge and flipped his truck, trapping her inside. Surprised and not thinking very clearly, I insisted that she come to my car, which she did, slippers, housecoat, and all. The passenger side window was rolled down, which Sally had done. My old Malibu had crank windows. They were a pain to roll down, and I could not reach the handle from the driver's seat. There was a puddle in the passenger seat, but no Sally. The lady asked me to walk across the road to the graveyard next to the church. We did, and she showed me Sally's grave. That incident started a 40-year pursuit of the paranormal for me. I have investigated all over the world since then, while serving in the military and my work afterward. Ghosts are real. My wife and I moved into our old house in New England in summer 2000. We had looked at dozens of houses, but this one just immediately felt like home. Soon after, we invited our good friend James and his husband up for a weekend. Keep James and his husband in mind. We were pretty well into getting our late-night party on, playing cards, drinking, smoking in the dining room. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw, though the experience was more like perceived, very vividly, an older woman with jet black hair sitting next to the old upright piano in the corner. The piano came with the house. We specifically requested that the previous owner include it in the sale because it was so cool and we didn't have much furniture. It wasn't even slightly scary. In fact, it was just like she was hanging out. I mentioned it to everyone. We laughed it off. Drinking and fun continued through the night. I was never really a ghost believer and still a skeptic 100%. But the rest of this story makes me really wonder. Several weeks later, we met a neighbor from down the street who lived in the neighborhood for 45 years. "You live in the Muriel King house," she tells us. Muriel was a really interesting lady. She was a famous fashion designer in the 1930s that lived there alone after her husband committed suicide. Very tragic, but she was an interesting lady, very independent and ahead of her time. She traveled all over the world. She was Greek, I think. Greek? I ask. Weird question, but did she have black hair? Yes, she had jet black hair even when she was an old woman. It was very striking. Yep, I got the chills right then. Many weeks later, I met another neighbor from down the street that had lived there for 60+ years. He starts telling me about Muriel. She was a famous fashion designer. She designed gowns for Rita Hayworth and all the classic film stars. She designed costumes for Broadway plays too. Her parties were legendary, he tells me. She used to have all her boyfriends from Broadway come up on the train, and they'd drink and sing show tunes at the piano in the dining room all night long. Yep. Now this all could be coincidental, but it just seems too much so. She must have been an awesome woman. People from around town have given us some of her original drawings and even an unfinished dress she was working on. There haven't been any more Muriel sightings, but shortly after my wife got pregnant, 20 years ago, we both woke up out of a cold sleep at the same time and looked at each other. Then our bedroom door slammed, hard. We like to think that Muriel wasn't a fan of kids. She never had any of her own, so she was letting us know that she was leaving. This is sort of an urban legend of my town. There's this woodworker who lives near the end of my grandmother's neighborhood. This was told by him to the neighbors, and ultimately spread to my grandmother. My grandpa told me about this legend. One day, the woodworker was coming back from his woodworking job late at night, around 2 a.m. He is a chain smoker and was smoking on the way home. His job site was across the railway station, and crossing the Tarrant tracks would cut around 1 hour from his way back. He was on foot, smoking as usually. At the end of the railway platform, someone was standing in the dark. As he approached him, the person, still clad in darkness, asked him, "May I have a cigarette?" The woodworker said nothing and gave him a smoke. The person started walking away from him in the direction of the train tracks, disappearing into the darkness. The next night, the woodworker was again on the same path from work. He again spotted the same person standing there. This time there was some light. In the faint glow of the lamppost, he saw the man a bit clearly. The man didn't have a head. His clothes were coated with blood. He approached this man unbothered, and again, the headless man asked him, "May I have a cigarette?" The woodworker didn't hesitate and handed him over a cigarette, then walked away without any fear. Side note: no, he was not drunk. He doesn't drink. He was sober. Next day, he decided to not cross the tracks and use the foot-over bridge instead. At 2 a.m., the station is nearly empty with just a few people here and there waiting for late-night trains. Yet the foot-over bridge closest to him was a bit secluded. He climbed it, and on his descent, he again saw the headless man standing near the base of the bridge. Actually, he's a really brave man, so he wasn't scared, rather pissed off with how this ghost was haunting him. He descended down the bridge and ignores the ghost altogether. The ghost is still saying, "May I have a cigarette?" He heard and unheard his request, then left for his house. Next day, he falls ill with a high fever. He hasn't told this series of incidents to anyone. Now that he's sick, he speaks up to his wife. His wife, as they were superstitious, speaks to a witch doctor of sorts. The man says that he needs to give the headless ghost a lit cigarette. That's the only way it will leave him alone. The following night, at 2 a.m., still burning with fever, he goes at the spot. He could see him standing there. He approached him. He lights a cigarette and hands it over to him. The headless ghost thanks him, something the ghost hasn't done the last 2 times, and fades into the darkness. The next day, his fever also disappeared. This is a story from my student placement at a children's hospital. The hospital was established as a military hospital in 1914 and was used in both WWI and WW2. It was just shy of 100 years old when I was there. There were definitely parts of the hospital scarier than others, especially at night. But luckily, I didn't encounter much myself. This is a story about one of the first wards I trained on. I was told that this ward was used as a fever ward in war times. Someone even said it was an open-air ward with no proper roof. But I don't know if that part is true. Night shifts were when the majority of weird things happened. I never did night shifts on this ward, but had been told many stories by the nurses and students while I was there. Cubicle 1 was said to be active at night. In the duration of time I was there was a baby in this cubicle. The baby was alone since the family had other children and couldn't stay overnight. The call button would go off throughout the night, despite the button being on the wall. There was also an incident of the baby's bouncer turning itself on overnight. The bouncer was battery-operated, meaning it would rock itself and play music. The bouncer was on the floor, nowhere near the baby. the staff did not like Cubicle 1 at night. The bay consisted of 4 beds and was previously used as a HDU section of the unit. There was one particular bed space that some nurses wouldn't go near, even on day shifts. There were multiple reports by children who stayed in this bed of a military man coming to visit them. He usually stayed at the end of the bed and talked to the children. Nothing malicious, the children were never frightened, but the repeated stories of the same man made the staff uneasy. As a side note, the most haunted place in the hospital was supposedly the mental health unit. These stories are also from other staff and students who had been there. A matron was said to be a very prevalent spirit there, seen by many of the staff. One parent even took a photo of her and showed it to staff. There was a corridor, I'm not sure what it was used for or where it went, that had chairs placed as markers. Anywhere beyond that point, you were likely to bump into the matron or someone else. I've been in a handful of hospitals for my training. If you want a ghost story, go to a hospital. Thanks for tuning in. Watch another video if you dare.